students, it's time to take a look at the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War really was built up off of colonial trade issues. And if you recall, the term that we used last time was mercantilism. And in the idea of mercantilism is you want more exports than imports, more gold coming into your country than leaving your country. So what does a colony mean as far as a mother country goes? We are the natural resources for those colonies, or for those countries. So the colonies that will make up eventually the United States will be sending stuff back to England. How important is that? Well, first off, remember English will pass the Navigation Acts, which actually limit what the colonists could pass back and trade back with other countries. So remember, our colonies are that important, so that means the land is that important. And if you recall from previous units, we have the French, the Spanish, and the British here. So we will have these European nations working on colonies. And the real reason they're here is to benefit the mother country in mercantilism. And they're going to work against each other, so we're going to naturally build up rivalries. So you'll see in Europe wars breaking out. That will end up having some issues or having some fighting going on in the colonies. So you have King William's War from 1689 to 1697. You'll have Queen Anne's War, part of the Spanish War of Secession, 1702 to 1713. And you'll have King George's War from 1743 to 1748. Most of those conflicts were taking place in Europe, not in the American colonies. But anytime the mother countries fight, usually the colonies will fight as well. So there will be some fighting in New York, in Massachusetts, and out in some of the frontiers. And overall, these wars really didn't do anything, didn't change really any major dynamics in the colonies. But there is this constant working and trying to claim land between the French and the British, and that is through the Mississippi River areas. Remember, the French claimed all the waterways of the Mississippi. And really it is the Ohio River Valley, which that would fall into Virginia's territory. And so Virginia thought that they should have that land. And so the governor of Virginia will send out a group to tell the French, basically, you need to get out of our territory. Who do they send? A young 21-year-old George Washington out there to tell the French to leave. Now, that does not go well for us, or go well for Washington at the time. He takes a huge defeat there, has to take blame for a lot of the start of the war. But overall, during this time period, the clash is not going well for the British. The British will build Fort Necessity. Washington's going to lose there. They're bringing in General Braddock, who is a British general who's going to be here to shape things up. He tries to march through the woods with an army, with the cannons that they would be taking. They literally had to have axemen clearing the path for them. Now, remember who the allies are, the French to a certain degree. The Indians. They don't care that you got cannons. They're going to hide behind rocks and trees and everywhere and come out and attack and not line up to the English and the French European style of shoulder to shoulder, what we often refer to as Napoleonic tactics. They're going to go with what we will refer to as guerrilla tactics. Hit and run and use the land to your advantage. So, don't forget, we call this the French and Indian War, but that doesn't mean it's the French versus the Indians. It's the British and the American colonies versus the Indians and the French. So that is the French and Indian War. We do have Indian allies. We have part of the Iroquois on our side. So the Iroquois Confederacy, at least half of the tribes in the Iroquois Confederacy joined the British forces. So both sides actually have Indian allies. And the Indians look at it politically and say, you know what, I think right now the French are winning. So sometimes they would leave the British and go join the French. Or at different times, other groups would leave the French and go to the British because they saw the end result playing out here eventually. One of these two European nations is going to win. Somebody's going to be in charge of me, and I better be on the right side. So you'll see some groups try to shift sides, some Indian groups try to shift sides. All right. So overall, the British are losing to the French. Washington has lost to the French. Braddock has lost to the French. And so it's not going all that well. Also, there are some Indian attacks. And some other of the Iroquois have been attacking some of the colonies. And so the British want them to organize. The colonies want to organize. And so what they call is for the Albany Congress. And the Albany Congress, they're going to discuss that. How can they better protect themselves? They want to try to unify. And so Benjamin Franklin will propose the Albany Plan of Union, which would basically give some type of coordinated army to protect themselves from Indian attacks, and you could also argue to protect themselves from the French. But most colonies do not want to do this because if you think about it, colonies feel like they are the ones in power. So if they give any type of power to a central authority, then they are losing their own power. So they don't want to give power away. They want to keep it for themselves. So most people will not join or want to join the Albany Plan of Union. Parliament doesn't want it to happen either because they want the colonies kind of be divided up as well. Basically, the Albany Plan of Union would give the colonists he will sign the blank check. That's what we call it, the blank check. And with a blank check, you just sign it. The person who's receiving it gives that, can put in as much money as they want. He says, I'm going to give a blank check for the war efforts. So no matter the cost, we are going to win this war. He uses well-trained generals, well-equipped generals, and with that blank check, with that amount of money, they were able to push through, and they're going to be fighting a war basically in Europe, in India, and in the Americas to gain colonial power. And that's really, that blank check and that willingness to fight is what's going to push the British over the top. So what we'll have is 1763, the Treaty of Paris. And in the Treaty of Paris, a couple of things really importantly happen here. One, let's think about what France loses. France is going to be the loser. France will lose all of its colonial territories in North America. Boom, pretty much did that. They lose Canada, they lose New Orleans, they lose all claims east of the Mississippi River. Spain jumps in here and gets all land west of the Mississippi River. Now, they lose Florida to the British. England is the big winner. They get all the French lands in Canada, exclusive trading rights for the Caribbean slave trade, and total control of India. Think about what India will become, what you remember from world history. It will be the crown, or the jewel in the crown for the British Empire. Now that the war is over, how do you pay for it? Who pays for it? So the British are going to want to colonize or tax the colonists. So to pay off for the debt, Britain's going to have to do some things. First off, they'll have the chief minister, George Grenville, will assess England's debt after the war and concluded that America needed to pay for the war efforts. And so there's going to be some different things that they'll try. They'll try the Sugar Act of 1764, the Currency Act of 1764, the Quartering Act of 1765, and the Stamp Act of 1765. This will redefine America's relationship with England. We are going to be upset about that. We are going to now start organizing different groups that will try to resist this based on the Navigation Act, based on mercantilism. Stamp Act was an attempt to raise revenue. So the Stamp Act is the first direct tax of the citizens. On that paper goods, everything was being taxed. And it will lead to the first colonial protest over that Stamp Act. The Sugar Act didn't lead to violence or protest. We kind of got rid of that. We'll help get rid of that. Colonial assemblies, merchants, and gentry protested. But most colonists at the Sugar Act was unaffected. Like I said, the Stamp Act is the first time you get direct direct effect off of it. It's a direct tax. Um, and this one will have or have mass protests by common citizens, because if you go to play a deck of cards or you go to pick up a newspaper, you have any legal document, you are going to be paying that tax, and you see it. So Massachusetts called for a Stamp Act Congress. Basically, let's get all the colonial colonies together, and let's have a meeting to petition the king to stop this, and the king will repeal. So the protests that they have will lead to mob riots. Tax collectors resigned. Mob riots. Tax collectors resigned, making the stamp tax impossible to collect. Boycotts of British goods happened. Save your money, you can save your country were some of the slogans. Women boycotted and mobilized. Because think about who's buying the products at home, or who's buying the products for home. It's women. So they're the ones doing that. Tax collectors could be tarred and feathered. So in 1766, the Stamp Act is going to be repealed by the Declaratory Act of 1766. But it states, Parliament is sovereign over America in all cases whatsoever. So while on one hand the colonists were like, yes, we got rid of the Stamp Act, they didn't realize at the time the British were going, boom, we're going to make sure that you understand that you are, our servant or our citizens. We're going to make sure you understand you are our citizens, and we can't have the right to tax you. So in 1767, Charles Townshend initiated the township duties, another set of taxes. This is on glass, lead, tea, paper, various different goods, consumable goods. So a major effect of the French and Indian War is the fact that colonists are unifying, colonists are resisting the British rule, colonists are speaking out, and all of it comes off of taxes. All of it comes off of William Pitt's wanting to win the war at all costs, or that blank check, because somebody's got to cash it, and it's trying to be cashed right now. So that leads us to the foundations of. Now, time for a little foreshadowing. Because of all of our issues here, because of issues around the country, European fighting has been going on. The French Revolution led to wars in Europe. Now it's time for a little foreshadowing. What does George Washington say in his farewell address? It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world.